Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of ClueCon Weekly. I am your host, Jon Gray, and today I'm honored to introduce Arthur Doler of Aviture. He is a senior software developer and a community and culture steward. Upon that, a navigator of code, and I'm excited to hear what we have to talk about today on the archaeology of code. So thanks for joining our podcast today, Arthur.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So to kind of just dive right in, we talk a lot about kind of like the psychology behind code. I was wondering if you could just drop your 2 cents on that, see how the brain and the code are kind of interacting with each other, and how you use that archaeology metaphor in order to navigate and reading code and also writing it.
Yeah. Archaeology to me is, so first, I've been a consultant for like 11 years at this company that I work at. We do software consultancy. So I've seen a lot of bad code because nobody really comes to a consultancy and says, hey, we have like $2 spare million and this really cool app. Do you want to come play with us?
Mm-hmm.
It's always, hey, it's broken. Can you please fix it? So the lot of code that you look at, and I've been historically the kind of dev that looks at it and just goes, "What are you even trying to do here? What is this
Mm-hmm.
nonsense? This is awful. You're not using this. You're doing that. This makes no sense at all." I had a coworker actually who started. I started on this one project at work that was very, very thorny and was a really acrimonious kind of handoff from the client had a previous developer we were taking over. The handoff was not kind or empathetic on either end
Mm-hmm.
really, but definitely kind of acrimonious from their end, in the sense of like we got the git repos as just zip files that they had intentionally deleted all the .git out of. So and then we found out later that we got like that zip file was actually a branch that was not what was deployed to production, so that was real fun.
Mm-hmm.
uh, but I had a coworker who just started when I was put on that project, and she was a couple cubes away from me. And she actually kept a notebook of all the things she heard come out of my cube during that project at one point. She claims to have lost it, but I don't know. We'll see. But the absolute profanity laced invective of what idiot wrote this code.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the default response a lot of us have to other people's code, and arguably to our own code written 6 months ago, even.
Definitely. Mm-hmm.
But the thing that I really came to realize over the course of that project in particular was that that code is an artifact. And it's an artifact created by other human beings for a purpose, to achieve a purpose. And there's a word for what we call, analyzing those artifacts from previous humans and that were intended to serve a purpose, and it's archaeology. So starting to think about it in terms of archaeology helped me put my mind right on understanding what I was really trying to do with that code. Because largely, I mean, in some cases, you're lucky enough you're going to get a rewrite, but in a lot of cases, you're not.
Yeah.
You have to work with it. And even in the cases where you do have a rewrite, it's so important to understand why that code does what it does. Because if you don't, it's going to bite you.
Mm-hmm.
So that mindset that we as developers have of, hey, the tastes have changed, right? And also that every other developer on this planet is a moron. That starts screwing with
Including
us.
ourselves.
Yeah,
Yep.
including past us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So extending a little bit of grace to those human beings puts us in a place where we're better able to say, well, wait a minute, maybe they did that because it needed to be that way, or because they didn't know any better. And even that
Yep.
one's a little judgy, but maybe they didn't have the time or training. Maybe someone told them, hey, you're using C# now, and they were a Visual Basic developer, and they had no time to learn anything about how
Mm-hmm.
Visual Basic is different from C#.
Yeah, and I am definitely a victim of that, where I find myself judging other people's code all the time, and the immediate response is always, "Oh my gosh, who wrote this? What were they thinking? This is absolutely garbage." Half the time it ends up being me, and I'm like, "Well, how did I even
Yeah.
write it like this?" So, as we're mentioning, we grow and we evolve, and it's difficult to be curious over judgmental, as
Hmm.
Ted Lasso would say. So what does empathy in code kind of look like, and how is that used in practice? Or how is it that you're able to shift your mindset into looking at it in that way?
It really is a question of starting to be curious about the story. instead of turning around, like curiosity is the antidote to that mindset. Instead of
Hmm.
turning around and having, well, so brains are storytelling machines. That's what they do all day long, constantly. So when you look at a piece of code, your brain immediately starts to provide you a story of why that code is the way that is. And
Yeah.
most of the time, that default story is the person who wrote this didn't know what the hell they were doing. That's the thing you've got to be. No, I've got to be curious instead, because your brain
Yep.
wants you to, like, our brain's job is really to save us energy in a lot of cases, to save us sugar. And
Hmm.
so it uses all of these cognitive biases and heuristics to make shortcuts, to make it faster and easier to think. And that really burns us, because we leap to these assumptions, these conclusions about these human beings that in some cases we have never met and never will meet, or in some cases are our coworkers or our future
Yeah.
coworkers.
And
That mindset really needs to be like getting curious about it and going, why is it this way? And oh, wait, this is different than it should be. Why is that the case?
mhm. No, and a lot of code is held up by some random guy in the middle of Oklahoma who you'll never know and is thanklessly keeping all of infrastructure alive today.
Oh yeah,
But
DNS.
as you talk about reading other people's code, you mentioned something to me earlier about we are never taught how to read code. You know, we're taught how to write it, but reading it is something completely different. So, how do you read code, and what are like some tools that you are able to use in our archaeology metaphor? You know, what's your rope and what's your lasso, and how is it that you are able to read code?
I mean, one, practice, but I think a lot of our distaste with code actually comes from not being ready to read it. If
Hmm.
you go take like an English curriculum, right? Like get a master's or a PhD in English literature, you're going to read so much work from other people. You're going to have to learn how to read other people's work and parse it and understand it. And we don't in our curricula, right? If you get a standard 4-year developer degree, like the CS degree, or even software engineering degree, most of the time you encounter other people's code is going to be group projects, and that's going to be very limited. You're not looking at code that somebody else wrote 6 years ago and having to puzzle
Hmm.
out what the absolute heck they were thinking in that moment. So luckily, there is actually a book called The Programmer's Brain by Philia Nermans. And she breaks it down and actually starts talking about the interrelation between your short-term memory, your long-term memory, and your working memory, and what that actually implies about how you should name code, like how you should name functions, how you should name variables, how you should structure code. It's a really fascinating book, not for super long, but she goes into great detail about things like chunking. So, uh, you ever think about phone numbers, right? Phone numbers, when we recite them, are things like, it's in the US, right? You got 3 digits, 4 digits. So it's da 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 da. And in fact, it's actually kind of psychotic if you meet somebody that recites a phone number as like da 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 da. Like
Hmm.
that's,
Yeah,
you look at that person
mess
like,
with you.
what?
Yep.
And the reason is because those subsets of numbers are chunked. It's really hard for the human brain to remember. The go-to answers like plus or 7 plus or minus 2 things is kind of your working memory or short-term memory. That's about how many things it can hold. So it's really hard for us to remember a 10-digit long number most of the time. And what instead your brain does is remember 3 chunks of numbers from 3 to 4, and
Hmm.
that seems to be the key to unlock a lot of memory. And so actually if you've ever seen those people that can recite ridiculous numbers of pi,
Yeah,
I'll,
not me,
they're
but
not me either. Some of the techniques they use are chunking, breaking it down into sections that have a pattern or a rhythm to them, and then remembering those as chunks. And those are easier for your brain to remember. In the same vein, we as developers can use chunking. If you encounter a set of function, like if you think about 8 to 9 lines of code, and you're reading through a function that's 20 lines long, and you encounter those 8 to 9 lines and they do something, you can just
hmm.
refactor that, use the extract method refactoring, pull it out, and have it be 1 line now. You've chunked it. And actually, one of the things Philly Nermans talks about that is probably my greatest takeaway from that book is actually you can just refactor sometimes and you don't have to commit it. You can refactor for understanding, which is almost anathema.
Uh-huh.
Like, to you get that feeling of like, no, that's wrong. I did the work. I should commit the code. But there are moments where she talks about just change it, change the code to be easier to read for you. in that moment.
Yep.
And that helps you get to that level of understanding. She has a whole bunch of other techniques, but things like refactoring and documenting as you go. Um, but she gets into details even about like whether you should be using dashes or underscores for various like variable names, and
Mm-hmm.
what, because it helps chunk. Like I don't know if you do this, but like we do a particular branch format for like Git where I'm working,
Exactly.
where it's the
Yeah.
ticket name and then either a dash or an underscore and then some kind of like description. And I've started switching to strictly underscore because it actually chunks the ticket name visually from the rest of it. So I use dashes between all the words and the descriptive part of it, and then
Mm.
an underscore between the two, because then visually your brain goes thunk. I can understand those a little better.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting way of reading it, and I am curious on more of the why that you are able to understand from people's code and how that kind of helps you game plan more for the future. So, has there been like any bias or any maybe even like cogs in our mental brain machine that you notice, and then being able to understand the why has helped you be able to
Yeah.
plan for future development and be a better programmer yourself?
Well, and I would argue that if you understanding how the code got the way it is essential to understanding how the code should move from that point on. Because if you don't understand why the code is the way it is, who wrote it that way, what the person's goal is, both the developer's goal when they wrote the code and the goal of the
Mm-hmm.
user that's walking through the end result of that code, then you're going to encounter all of these places where things either don't make sense because you don't understand the drive behind here. Oh, why is this thing doing this thing in this one way? Well, that's because this is Bob's piece of the application, and Bob likes his things tab separated for whatever
Mm-hmm.
godforsaken reason. Like that's why this piece is TSV and this piece is CSV. And if you rewrite everything to be CSV, because obviously you want the consistency, Bob is going to scream holy hell, and you're going to have a user acceptance regression, and you're going to have to go change it back to TSVs in the first place. That's not
Yep.
an actual example, but I've had very similar things. Or uh, the application that I was talking about that was just absolutely kind of thorny. I mean, some of that code started
Mm-hmm.
being written before I graduated college, and I graduated college in 2003 to give you an idea. So
Wow.
it was this hub and spoke thing where they had uh, it was for, let's say, bingo, and they had a parlor where they were drawing these balls, these numbers, and then the results were actually simulcast out to all of these bars around the area. So you could sit in a bar and play bingo and bet on bingo and see the results in the bar, and or you could be in the parlor and do it. This code it was written in C. It wrote their own multiplexer because of course they did, and they're multiplexing over file descriptors in a way that makes absolutely no sense when you're looking at this code, because they're working with sockets. So why are they using sockets instead of file descriptor? And then it all kind of clicked into place when I realized that this code was written at a point in time when all of those locations connected to the parlor with dial-up modems instead of persistent
Mm.
cable connections. And suddenly it's like, oh, okay, so that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
and it didn't change us from wanting to change that code, but it helped us understand why it was the way it was, and to understand, and this is the super important part, like there's so many forces that change the code, that shape the code that we write.
Mhm.
Things like resources, even on your team. Maybe you don't have a DBA, so you're doing this thing, and the code's not great at the DB level. Maybe you're doing some things with stored procedures that you probably shouldn't be because you don't have anybody with the expertise to tell you that's dumb, or you just don't have the time to sit back and learn enough to do it. You're just cramming it out the door to get it done,
Yeah.
and the those things shape the code that we write. If you don't understand why, like what forces shape the code, then you don't understand what things are still true. Maybe Bob that wanted his stuff tab separated, he left the company 3 years ago. We can do everything as CSV now. You won't know that until you understand why it was tab separated in the first place. And it means that
Mhm.
you have to understand that backstory to really be able to move forward with confidence.
So, are there any, fossils or archaeological finds, metaphorically, that you are really passionate about preserving? Like maybe it's a technology language, or a theme or a way of writing code that doesn't necessarily make sense, but to you it's very passionate and you hold it close to yourself. Is there something that you passionate and want to make sure that we preserve as we kind of move forward throughout technical development?
That's an interesting question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that.
I didn't go over that one with you. That was just something that came across
Yeah.
as you were talking about these. I was like, I wonder if there's anything that you are really passionate about that alongside the others, people kind of whittled out. I know Vim versus Emacs, or
Mm.
even going as broad as that, but maybe even like a code writing style or a language that you've seen outdated that you wish we would bring back. What would be in your museum?
That's a good question. I mean, I feel like the object-oriented days are mostly behind us in a lot of cases. Uh, Even things like Java are starting to move towards a little more functional style, or at least a kind of hybrid. I definitely put that in a museum because I don't
Get
know
that
that I
away from
like.
practice for me.
Yeah,
My
yeah.
perspective on that.
I don't know that I'd do it, like, but I definitely would enjoy going to look at it sometimes.
Hmm.
If that makes.
Yeah. Keep it there, away, locked up in a cage,
Yeah,
and outside of my reach.
but I
Um,
mean, like,
because
the thing I'm working on right now is a piece of software that has running concurrently at the same time, ASPX VB. It has some backbone marionette code. If you ever worked in that era of front end,
no,
um,
I did not.
yeah, it used to be the hotness of back in the day. And then it's got a JavaScript and Redux layer, and then a TypeScript TanStack query layer. And some of those are running concurrently in the same project, like the JavaScript and the TypeScript one, but the others are running as like separate projects, even deployed and run
Hmm.
separately, that are just kind of interleaved as this application. And I think about those as like strata, as you're going through, like if you think about like the geological strata of the application as it's built through, and the
Yeah,
presence of a piece of code in a particular strata can tell you a lot about uh, what it was, when it was written, for starters, but also what was the prevailing winds at the time it was written. The backbone marionette code is using this all over the place, which is no modern script JavaScript developer is really trying to do that unless they're stuck doing it for framework reasons, because this is just
yeah.
nonsense. And why would you ever do it? Like, we can't fix it, so let's just all go functional. It's fine.
Hmm.
Uh,
Well, in kind of looking forward, I know that this is probably like the most fast-paced development cycles that we have ever really seen, especially with AI, kind of how people are writing and generating code. We've never had so many software developers, actually writing code these days. How do artifacts, how have they kind of changed over the recent years, or really do you think that they have? And what are like some new twists or challenges that you find when exploring code bases, in 2025, kind of now, versus maybe when you were investigating and looking into them before?
Most of the time, I'm not encountering stuff I have not yet encountered anything that was written with heavy AI use yet. We've
Okay.
not had anything where everything's very new in that front. So nobody's come and said, like, this is dated, please add this thing to it.
Yeah.
But looking at my coworkers who have done some of those things, or times when I've tried the generation pieces, the artifacts are idiosyncratic in a lot of ways. If you look at output of this code, it is, outputs of code generators, they are often doing things that don't make sense or that aren't necessarily required. I'm thinking of things like nested checks on variables that don't really need to be checked, or looping over things multiple sets of times in ways that are work technically but aren't necessarily performant. The It becomes a lot harder to perform code archaeology at that point, because the intent is at the prompt level and not necessarily at the code level, and the prompts are usually not retained in any real way, right? It's just the output of the prompts that we're providing. If we're going to really, I'm let's just put it, I'm bearish on AI, especially in a lot of cases, but um,
Hmm.
if we are going to do this as a profession, then we need to turn around and actually start thinking about the prompts that we put out there as an artifact in and of itself, right? Those are specs that we are writing. If we're going to do this right, and the thing is actually going to work well, those are specifications, and those specifications need to become part of the documentation that we actually have as software. Because otherwise, I'm looking at a piece of code and I do not understand what your intent was, because it's been obfuscated by the fuzziness of any uh, generative AI, because that's part of what
Hmm.
they do, is to just be this somewhat mean average of the code, right?
Yeah. No,
Uh,
it's been crazy to see how much you can write and produce. Even from a couple years ago, I mean, taking like classes in college and you have to write down on like pen and paper how to do code. And now just to see how much different we are now in terms of generating some of that stuff.
mhm,
It is really important, and something that we try to keep in mind is how to create code that will be easily, or how to create APIs that will be easily interpreted by AI LLMs. How do we make that documentation so that
mhm.
it is readable in that way? So kind of making the proper artifacts or constraints for the models in order to kick out the results that we really want is pretty important. But I see how setting yourself up for success is really the best way, making sure that your prompts are wrangled in the correct way, because otherwise you're spending just as much time trying to fix your broken AI code than if you were to just actually do the work yourself and learn how to write it. So I
Well,
see
and
some
it's
interesting practice with that.
until and unless we get a full loop of being able to write a prompt, generate some code, have another prompt, another generative AI look at that code and correctly interpret and parse it on a regular, reliable basis, we'll never be able to make the leap to where we don't have to look at that code. I'm
Hmm.
thinking of the days of, I mean, you could go all the way back to compilers when those were a thing, like when they weren't a thing, when you were writing pure machine language. And
Yeah.
then suddenly somebody says, a couple of people, including Grace Hopper, like, we should do COBOL. And all the old people are like, harumph. And I'm definitely in the graybird category at this point on that. But
Hmm.
you think about like the transpiler days with JavaScript back when we were shoving shims into everything, and you had to understand what the output of the other side was because sometimes it didn't work right. Until we get to a point when you don't have to crack open that box, we're going to have to look at that code. And at least for now, code is a human artifact. It matters way more. Like, so many more people are going to read that code you write than machines, because that's who reads that code. That's the people who are coming after you that are going to go, hey, what is this doing and how do I make it change? And then, again,
Hmm.
until the LLMs can jump in and understand the code at that level, until they can do the archaeology for us, which I've seen no sign of them really being able to do, that is still going to have to be a human operation.
Yeah.
And
No,
especially
there's definitely.
the well, so one of the things I talk about is like being able to, as you go through, say, version control, you like Git history, you can actually start assembling an idea of who those developers were, even if you don't work with them, even if you've never met them. You're looking at this person and saying, "Oh, why is this person's writing C sharp, but they're putting like my in front of every variable." They're
Hmm.
probably a VB developer that's now coding in C sharp and have not had the adequate training or somebody to teach them what idiomatic C sharp is, right?
Yeah.
Or they're just under the gun. And that one particular, we actually hired that dev later onto a project. And yeah, he was basically told, like, you have 3 months to rewrite this entire system. Go. Just me, just you.
Yeah.
So he was reaching
And
for what was comfortable and familiar.
no, that's really interesting. I like that you kind of are able to draw a picture of who this type of person is.
Well,
Not even so much how they look, but you can tell a lot about a person by their code.
well, and if you get an idea of, okay, this person is really into well architectured DRY code, and then you find a spot where they're not doing that, that should make you curious. That should bring, like, to bring
Hmm.
it back to curiosity, you should ask, why did they not do, like, they would have normally abstracted this. Why didn't they do it here? That should be a point where you start digging a little deeper and go, oh, wait a minute. Oh no, there's this external thing here that's happening that they have to do it this way. That's LLMs are nowhere close to that level of depth yet. Even if they can understand
Hmm.
what the code is actually doing, how the code got that way, they're completely ill-equipped to deal with.
Yeah, especially when you get just caught in that snake loop of, yeah, of course you're correct, and then you're just reading off of your own wrong code, and then it's
Yes,
writing code based off your wrong code, and you just get looped into
yeah,
that.
yeah, ditch your context window and start over, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Scratch everything. Well, Arthur, what else have I not asked you yet? Was there anything you want to plug? What do you have going on in your world?
So I'm a conference speaker. I go to a lot of different conferences. Upcoming next, I'm going to be at I'll be at Copenhagen, actually, at Copenhagen Dev Fest in a couple weeks. But then at Colorado Springs for Dev2 Next, which is a really fun conference. If you're watching this and you're in the area, you should go and check it out.
Nice. That sounds like a great time. Well, Arthur, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you and your contributions to the ClueCon community.
Thanks very much for having me.